Merhabalar, hoş geldiniz.
Hello and welcome to the Ethical Forum of Ethics and Reputation Society. We're extremely happy to be with you. As you know, today we'll be discussing about the third-party ethics liabilities, and we'll have three panelists attending this session. And in this session, we'll have a perspective discussion in the eye of the global partners, and we'll be discussing about ethics and compliance risks at all dimensions for an hour. Briefly, I'd like to introduce the panelists. Lawyer Gülay from Arçelik, Global Compliance Manager, welcome. Attorney at law Merve Evrim İkiler from BASF, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Law and Compliance Manager, welcome. Eray Akdağ from Borusan Holding, Public Policies and Corporate Relations Director. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the participants for kindly accepting our invitation. If we were to sum up the experience of these three people, I think that would be quite high, and we'll probably will be quite lucky to attend a 1 hour session to hear that experience. So for a brief introduction into this debate, just to open up this issue and to keep people focusing on our debate point, the third-party liability issue has been quite attractive for some time due to several reasons. Number one, globalization, because we know that with the globalization of the companies doing business in different languages and cultures will have the need to work with third parties. Actually, it's a need, and they are enjoying the advantages of this, because strategically it brings along a lot of advantages, but quite naturally every positive thing would bring along some risks, some advantages with some disadvantages. So in this respect, we need to look at the empty side of the glass in this session, what kind of challenges we're facing. First, we'll be discussing from a strategic point how the perspective of the companies are, and then about the risks. And then, of course, we'll just bring it down to Turkey. First, the matter is globalization, and with the increase of international trade going on, there has been a huge impact on Turkey and the Turkish companies, and the third-party issue has been quite an interesting point for the Turkish companies, because they in some ways work with international companies. So quite naturally, Turkish companies found themselves in a very complicated and gigantic network of business that has started to be some matter that needs to be managed. But strategically, on the other hand, it brought some advantages. But on the other hand, the situation for Turkey after several developments around the globe is FCPA, the anti-bribery law in the United States has provided settlements, and the main actor is the third parties and the companies. And in this respect, the corporate employees who are having some kind of bad engagement with the companies. So looking around Turkey, in terms of the perception index for corruption, Turkey is not positioned in a very likable way, and we better name it as a high-risk country, so to speak. That wouldn't be a big exaggeration. Therefore, the geography we're living in and our surrounding is quite risky. And the Anti-Corruption Society in the United States has been running a study for the last 2 years, resulting in the fact that the geography that we're existing in represents the geography with the highest level of corruption and bribery. So adding up all these risks, third parties still remains an issue that needs to be clarified for us. And it's for this reason that in this panel we'll be discussing with the panelists a two-partite discussion. The first part will be about their own perspective, why they consider it an important matter. We'll discuss around it for about half an hour, and then we'll move on to the opportunities side of the coin. Of course, it brings along some opportunities and how the risks are managed and reduced by the companies. We'll be discussing on that, dear panelists. Firstly, I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Kaya. Arçelik is the pupil of our eye because it's a global Turkish company. I would like to hear from you how you are managing third-party relations as this gigantic structure. Hello, and thank you very much for this opportunity and invitation. And you know that I'm connected on my mobile phone because of technicalities, and if I disappear suddenly, it's because of this. So you look quite good. There is no problem. Compliance is really important and third-party issues are quite relevant, but I'd like to start by discussing, by sharing with you our perspective to the big picture in Arçelik, because at the end of the day, particularly third-party compliance is not about doing nothing, but just ensuring third-party compliance. We need to focus on the big picture. For about 2.5 years in Arçelik, we've been running a compliance program globally, and it's still evolving. But of course, one point to be remembered is, as a member of Koç Holding, Arçelik has never, it's not like we didn't have anything about compliance at hand. We already had a running stance in Turkey, and we have a way of doing business, and the members of the company has always raised itself to this compliance matters, but we've grown too much and extended to many countries, so we needed more regulated, more automated world of functioning. And this is merely what we are doing, and it's not about the fact that we didn't have standards running in this respect. So we are a bit lucky, and we are not in a very challenging position in Arçelik because we already had a kind of code of conduct, so to speak, at hand. But the company still grows at high pace. Therefore, when we started off, we have renewed the code of conduct framework, started off with 12 policies, and the perspective was the entire higher management had to also take some initiative, because it wouldn't be some kind of a world that we're writing down policies but no one cares about it. And the claim was, we'll write down the policies and everybody will be following it. So we didn't want to over-regulate this organization. But the thing is, the time is running and we're identifying the needs and the requirements, and we need to make the 100% technological investment to make sure that the policies are running. Third-party compliance is somehow linked with business ethics, which is the main hat we consider in this organization. So we find it quite relevant. Why relevant and quite important? Because as you would appreciate, we're speaking about a gigantic global organization. We have suppliers, dealers, technical service network, and there are some ad hoc partners we are partnering with. And in our perspective, referring to corruption and bribery quite rightfully, because these are quite important items about third-party compliance. But in our relations with third parties, we rather have a broader perspective. And this is quite an integrative perspective when we say that third parties, number one, are obliged to respect laws and regulations, and it's minimum standard for us. Number two is we're speaking about human rights, and when it comes to human rights, it's all about compliance to employment laws and prevention of discrimination. And this reputation. And then we say health and safety is also another important issue for us. Therefore, we should be following the regulations about health and safety. And sustainability is extremely important for us. As you know, Arçelik is too much involved and dedicated to sustainable way of doing business. And we are known with our respect to the environment. Therefore, the suppliers need to be evaluated in this respect. And at the end of the day, we're speaking about team meaning prevention of corruption and bribery and conflicts of interest. On top of it, we might add different functions that might be necessary or relevant for the purposes of our relations with any third party. Even the moment that we say hi to the third party, we disclaim and also announce our values and our principles, and we oblige them to follow them ecosystem, otherwise they cannot be involved in our ecosystem. In other words, we're speaking about an idealistic, maybe with too much expectation kind of ecosystem. And we create an impact that we are quite proud of. And we are still in this journey around the globe, and this journey is not over yet, but we have taken quite a distance. I think that stance is really important. We're doing it idealistically. I mean, and as I say, we get the entire support of the top management. This is why we are making it possible, and we are quite happy that under normal conditions, small and medium-scale enterprises that are working with us will not be as keen on this issue. But with our impact, we change the way of doing business for everyone, in the positive sense, of course, and we're extremely honored about it. There was something that you referred to at the outset, which I'm trying to find here. I remember taking note of it. Things other than money. It's really a quite nice statement. It sounds like a motto, but we're speaking about things other than money. Of course, these things also bring money, right? Can you please elaborate on that? It's really, maybe it can be quite an arrogant way, but when I speak on behalf of my company and my team, because this is a company with a good heart, it's really important. It's a good-hearted company. We are doing it. Of course, there are some business interests, like we are running up high in the sustainability index globally, I mean, and that ranking your position too would make sure that your credibility is improved, and it has a huge business advantage. But the willingness of doing this is not about writing down policies and putting checks on a checklist to make that happen. But otherwise, we are doing it because we are a good-hearted company, and we want working conditions for everyone to be improved, as well regulated as stipulated in the legislation. We don't want any conflict of interest going on in our organization, and we've gone too far that we've written down in our policies, since it's also a compliance risk. We have found something as the CEU rule in our operational policies, stating that the compliance function does it. It's organized under the compliance function, but we are doing it for the CEU. The risk is directly yours, and the compliance team is working essentially for you. And we don't stop there, and there is a compliance officer, like member of the board or executive board, who also is involved in regular reportings. And we need to understand that, yes, we are a good-hearted company which wants to leave some good impacts and good footprints to the ecosystem we're existing in. But at the other hand, if you comply with these, there will be very good business benefits, and not necessarily an obligation. I think the headlines of the day is a good-hearted company. Quite modestly, you keep saying a good-hearted company, but people who hear us will probably find it weird, but Arçelik, which I always say everywhere, Arçelik is finding loans cheaper than in the Turkish treasury, in the global markets. And if I may, I'd like to leave the floor with that in hand to our second speaker. Why would third parties matter for you, Ms. İkiler? And I would like to start with the perspective of BASF, and then I will go on with why the third parties matter for us. You know that BASF is a chemical company based in Germany. Therefore, compliance to ethical values is a priority for us. So as to emphasize it, Germany, BASF set some code of conduct, procedures and policies for a history of 20 years in time with the evolving dynamics it has led itself to updating. And on the other hand, we keep speaking about code of conduct, policies, procedures, but for BASF, compliance to ethical values, quite honestly, is a culture. And this culture is targeted to survive in Turkey as BASF Turk. Actually, the community, the society, our clients do have an expectation about the way of doing business of BASF. And in return for this expectation, we have a responsibility for the health, welfare, and safety of the society. And it's number one priority. But how can we make it happen? How can we safeguard this value by the society? Then comes in the third parties, because above all, without the supply chain, we cannot act properly. As many other companies, as BASF, we are using dealers in doing business and agencies sometimes when and if necessary. Therefore, through the dealers we're acting, and we have the product portfolio that we're acting this way. So from the eye of the customers or clients, the customers do not consider suppliers differently than BASF. Therefore, we need to align their compliance culture with ours. Otherwise, the trust and faith of our customers in us cannot be safeguarded. Therefore, we need to work with the correct third parties to safeguard this understanding, and this third party should consider ethical values as us. Beyond that, of course, when we say supply chain, it's not limited only to the dealers, also suppliers. From the suppliers to the dealers, all the chains of the supply chain will complement each other. Any mistake in any of these chain loops may probably have a direct impact on our operation or the direct products ending up in our customers. Therefore, every loop of the supply chain and the presence of every member of the supply chain everywhere really matters for us, because essentially the presence of the operation can only be possible with the support of the third parties. Speaking from a legal perspective, though, as you know, many legislations around the globe indicate and also a liability on the shoulders of the company due to the acts of third parties. As a German company, of course, we need to comply with not only the German legislation, but also the other pieces of legislation around the world. And it is a must and a responsibility for us to make sure that the third parties comply with this legislation. Unethical behaviors of third parties will lead probably to financial sanctions on us. Therefore, reputation, trust, and presence of operation and exposure to financial sanctions are quite important, quite relevant terms to be considered in this respect, summarizing why we need to respect all these values. In this respect, selection, approval, and management of third parties are quite critical for all of us. Therefore, we have a quite clear strategy, global strategy with zero tolerance and no flexibility somehow. Therefore, our full dependence on the system is really important, and then later we'll be discussing how we are managing around these systems. So many rules, so many systems. Would they really help us? Definitely, as we have tested so far. And as a summary, I can say that working with a correct third party who considers and respects ethical values as number one priority is important, not only for the protection of internal company information, compliance with the legislation, and making sure that the companies who feel to have an engagement and responsibility for the society are fulfilled. And it's also important to make sure that the relationship between the company and the society are robust. This, of course, would bring along very good customer satisfaction, but it's a social responsibility maybe beyond all to do it. Therefore, we need the support of third parties to be able to do that. Thank you. Now, two lawyers and two compliance directors, and we'll follow this with Eray Akdağ. Reading his title, I would take a pause because it says public policies, which urge me to be more serious, because the singers are also very serious when the symphony orchestra plays behind them. And you're from Ankara, and it's really confining the debate. Leaving aside this joke part, of course, I will open the door to another perspective, because the two directors have already explained us why these concepts matter. From the outset, you have a different perspective, which I think will be shedding light to our panel discussion, and I was quite sure about that. Now, I would kindly ask you to provide a perspective from the content of your title. I would like to ask you, for Borusan, Borusan is a golden company, an international Turkish company. And now, why do you think it is important to select such third parties that will comply with your strategies as well? Thank you very much, Mr. Sebilcioğlu. Thank you for your kind introductory words. And on behalf of my company, I'd like to say that we're extremely honored to be a part of this debate. Now, I'd like to bring along a respect, a reputation, culture, and business. When we're working with the government, or governments per se, because when you're a multinational company, you need to work with several governments, in designing and running these projects with different governments, you need to be quite delicate. But two brief references before getting into this debate. Firstly, Mrs. Gülay referred to a very nice thing to have a member of the board in charge of ethics. We have a similar model, and one of the members of the board is also assigned with ethics. It's really important. Organigram structure is quite critical to make sure that the system works fault-free. Another thing is, as Mrs. Merve referred to, the risks that can be exposing to company to, ethical values, trust, reputation. These are all quite relevant in terms of integrity. We're on the same page. We're running our works in the same parallel. As Borusan Group, one of the essential liabilities is to have a sustainable value for the country, for the society. And also during the opening remarks, there was the same reference to social reputation, because it also brings along many similar things, provided that you have the target of being sustainable. To be able to do that, you need to deliver high quality services, making sure that they are sustainable, because at the end of the day, it brings the subject down to reputation and trust to be successful in the global arena. If you'd like to go to the Giants League, then it would be about creating value and reputation. It's not merely a responsibility of the global partners and the society, which it is, but beyond that, because of the nature of the business, it needs to be considered in this respect. I'd like to make an advice for those who would like to read. There is this book, The Success Story of the Republic, and it also refers to the values of establishing the Republic, matching with Borusan's essential core values. When we say third-party success, perception of and thrust in the eye of the third parties, or in brief, the third-party relations may end up with very good, very critical results. If anyone is curious, I would like to highly advise the book to you. Our founder, the late Sunbay, says that I have always worked to pay this debt to the society. It is an intangible, a moral liability or a debt to the society. 7 main sectors, 37 subsectors we're working in 12 countries on a global scale, almost exporting to 80 countries. And when doing that, we are partnering with more than 10 World League partners. So eventually we need to comply with these standards. Also vis-a-vis our relations with the suppliers and our business partners, this is an expectation that needs to be met, and it's our expectation. As I said, the society or the community derived development needs to be supported with artistic aspects, transparency, accountability, liability. But beyond that, of course, we need to trespass it so that we can have a sustainable value, because as we get higher, we will go to the higher segments as a society. Previous speakers have led to examples, but a series of guiding, maybe guidelines are important, both written and not written. They need to be respected only by the employees and the business partners. Of course, the legislation of different countries, business relations, cultures need to be considered and respected. But it's not important to look successful in the short run, but we need a sustainable system that would make us successful in the long run. Eventually, third parties we're running with the business agreements with, and maybe, as you say, we need to define the government, the public policies, because at the end of the day, we get into an interaction with these parties, and there, of course, there are some short-term, targets that were in the past. But if you're arriving in a country, you should be targeting a long-term, problem-free policy for your relations in that country. And therefore, we need to have some structures in place, because we're speaking about a 360-degree value chain. And as long as we can make that happen, we will be able to run that value chain. And with the requirements of my role, we are working with our stakeholders, and in our relations with our stakeholders, and it's really critical part that we respect all these rules. At the opening speech, Aslanım referred to a motto from Pink Floyd, we can only survive together. It's the same story for all of us, but in some cultures, it's quite essential. Your competitors are your most important business partners that would urge you to develop. And stakeholders, more stakeholders you have in the market or in a sector, the faster you'll have access to fair competition conditions and the true correct legislation. Therefore, it's really valuable for us. And of course, as Borusan, we have a loop for quality standards. It's a cultural aspect, but also a part of the internal legislation. This is something that we're trying to build our strategies upon. Therefore, we're cooperating with the public media, social sites, and the third-party contracts. The to-dos and not to-dos are defined in this general framework, and we have a very broad written culture, and in this respect we are also publishing some of it online, and we have some dedicated internet portals for those members of Borusan. Beyond that, another issue that needs to be considered is our general understanding. In the time of the pandemic, we've had to go through some challenges, and the motto is, I protect my employees, stakeholders, and business partners. This triangle needs to be supported through the dynamics, and recently we published a sustainability guideline, climate, human, and innovation. Again, complementary triangle. The only aim is to have a reliable chain of values and to make it survive. Their ethical and compliance sensitivity must be maximized. In the short run, it causes some extra costs, but in the medium to long term, it is quite cost effective that we cannot think otherwise. Because you know that, Fikret, particularly in your domain, there are a lot of bad examples. Any negligence there might result in very severe outcomes, very serious results, and from Borusan, your reputation, you may lose reputation instantaneously. This is a company that has a history of 72 years, and Ahmet Bey, Ahmet Kocabuyuk, the president of the executive board, published a message before the pandemic for the global targets. And I think most importantly, social and environment development urges for the needs of the global success. And dreaming of Borusan's 200th anniversary strategies were based on the side of sustainability, as he stated. And a note that I've made here, which I need to read here, because I think this is the statement that makes a good summary. If the target is to survive 200 years later, therefore we need to put sustainability in our DNA. And it's worth spending money for, because our values make it a liability, and at the same time it's more cost-effective and wise for all companies who want to be sustainable. Coming to the end, if I may, I'd like to again say that today for an international company, the world is a small international, a global village. Doesn't matter what your field of specialization here is, because when you list down our expertise, international arena is really a minefield where the financial compensation is nothing. Otherwise, we are speaking about market risk and even liberty restrictive punishments. Therefore, what we need to do is to avoid such acts. Essentially, my main message is for us, third parties, our customers, suppliers, administrative decisions, governments, private sector representative organizations, and undoubtedly societies and communities that we are part of. Any world that we're in should respect these values, provided that you want to grow to become a global, reputable brand. If you want to survive, then your goods and services must be at the highest standards possible, and you need to develop a healthy strategy.
So I'd like to conclude my words by mentioning the last thing. Doing international work, international business. We're just living in the times of a change and transformation. Maybe projecting for the future is much more important, so as to have a good business strategy. We have a series of concepts. Also, I'm just leading within my group the ECG reporting, environmental social governance report, sustainability report, the Green Deal, and about carbon calculation, and so many things that we never discussed before. CDP at the same time important. We are just working on several issues. Therefore, the sustainability issues, we have a series of concepts with Glasgow. In November, there will be 26th UN environmental COP26, the United Nations conference, and probably a new framework will be the case. And the Paris Convention, the president also before the United Nations made a declaration saying that within this year and the international agenda would totally change. And as I said in another conversation, looking at the trend in the European Union is so important. Members, especially due diligence of the members of the executive board, and due diligence issues are changing. There is also several regulations in Germany for the supply chain, so we're moving towards a different direction, and therefore we have to adopt the same for our business partners, our suppliers, and I guess we have three things to say. One, we need actually sustainability with corporate responsibility. The second thing is global reputation, and the third thing is the international compliance to regulations. Thank you very much for your great talk. Ethics and Reputation Society especially, and working, paying attention to the third-party compliance, contributing a lot, and we are the advocacy on this, and especially in the last half an hour, listening to the panelists, why third-party issue is important. Everything that you're discussing is a part of our advocacy program, so it means that we're on the right track. Why? Because you are just three people from the actual kitchen of what we're doing. Thank you very much. I think we have enough reason so as to deal with the third parties. And I think it is now the time to go to how we manage these risks. As you all know, I also would like you to mention about what we expect from the third parties, our business partners. I'm so enthusiastic to ask this question. Why? Because you are main corporations on this topic, and we have several representatives of the main company here, and I'm just raising the bar and saying that we also have business partners. You are the mother company, and all the business partners would like to be a part of the mother company, especially in developing new strategies and all. What are your expectations with regards to ethical issues and compliance? So let's, with the same order, start with Gülay. Well, Mr. Sebilcioğlu, this forum is much more important than ever, I should say. Why? Because we compliance officers are in particular the part of the people trying to educate all the time, and in this rapidly moving corporate life, including our business partners, we are the people that cause so much trouble for them, immediate problems, I can say. So it's really very important to tell them why we are doing this. It is perfect to have this opportunity. I will give an answer to your question, but Mr. Akdağ said a lot of nice things about reputation and sustainability. One additional comment I would like to make with regards to Arçelik. And in 2020, for the second time, in the NDA, we are the industrial leader. And in the emerging markets, 4 years in a row, the very first and the only company included in this list. Whether it's worth to invest or not, they were discussing it, whether we need to have a compliance program or not. If in the audience there are people thinking about this, that's not the case. Arçelik is doing this, we're not doing it free of charge. Of course we spend money, of course we spend effort. In return for this, what we get, I'm sure it's especially the regulatory risks and so on, we are eliminating, it's okay, but other than that, in real terms, it also brings you a business opportunity. It also makes you help you to raise your income. It is not a question whether you should do it or not. Of course you should do it, but just maybe it is important to raise the awareness. So it's really very valuable that you mention about raising income, because we have to make money at the end of the day. We're just doing trading here. So it's nice for you to mention that it also has such a financial gain. Of course, we are a big corporation, we are a world leader on our own, but of course once we are suppliers of the others in the world, they're also asking us, what are you doing? Do you have child workers? How do you, for example, what's your gift policy? What is your anti-corruption policy? And so on. Sometimes we also act like the suppliers and they ask us the same question. So it's something that also affects our business lives in a positive manner. So any corporation of a certain scale, in my opinion, should somehow do this, less or more. Thinking about what we ask from our suppliers, maybe we are asking for too much from our suppliers, but that's not the case. We're not asking for too much. Why? Because from our perspective, these are the things that should be at minimum. For example, no room for corruption. You should always abide by the rules, the laws and regulations. You should have certain standards of working and so on. These are the minimum requirements and minimum standards. But what is important is that if you make money by compromising from this is actually a money stolen from somewhere. For example, if you do not abide by the rules of health and safety at work, that's not your earning, that's not your profit. Actually, you should not. Actually, you miscalculate your profit, I would say. Actually, that's how I am. I would say, if you're asking me, you're saying great words today. And as everything is actually recorded, it's important to record these words. You are right, actually. It's all about getting money out of the pocket of some other people. Maybe it's not an easy task to consider it this way, but people like us, this is all about building a culture. As we mentioned initially, we said we're proud of our ecosystem. It's a huge ecosystem, and we are just so happy that we touch upon them. you're right. Of course, maybe not each and every company can be that much sensitive, but if our partners would like to work with mother companies as such as us, they have to touch upon this. What are your expectations? Maybe you can answer those questions. First of all, at the purchasing side, both for technical service and the dealers, we have systems analyzing different risk factors. In purchasing, of course, looking at the purchasing power and so on, but at the same time, risk of corruption or anti-corruption. We take certain commitments, for example, to make sure that our business ethics are well understood. And we are supporting them with items and articles in our contracts, and we are building electronic systems so as to digitally monitor them, because after a certain period of time not possible to do everything on paper, especially as a part of the pandemic. Other than that, as Arçelik, another risk that we pay attention to is economic sanctions and embargo. Especially we are just working on a huge geography, and of course, in terms of the corruption perception index and in terms of the risk of economic sanctions, we are working with some of the countries that are at risk. And as this is the case, some automated systems are established. Over the CP, for all our third parties are registered on a daily basis. We cross-check them with the economic sanction list. That's an automatic system that we have. Of course, we take it to an advanced step how the system will work. If, for example, there is a risk of economic sanction in any daily search, then all the other systems cross-talking within the SAP will also block them. What I mean is that no procedure or no transaction will be completed with that third party until a legal proceeding started. Because also we make all these search initially, but as you know, especially for the third parties, their condition may change from day to day during a daily search. If something happened, if there's for example a warning and so on, there will be compliance analysis and then the block will be removed. So zero tolerance for such risks. Same for risk of corruption. Starting with next year, and we will have a supply chain policy to be applicable, and especially for due diligence for the third parties, will be taken a step forward with this new year. What will you do next year? Very briefly, well, in a practical sense, we were asking so many questions, but we'll be asking more questions over the digital media. So they have to answer these questions. They have to answer the questions, otherwise they cannot possibly work with you. Yes, that's how it will work. Maybe another question to you. You're a global company and you touch so many places. Maybe a couple of words about the way that you work. We have a joint venture that we have, the joint venture at the same time with Hitachi. And from the Arçelik side, there will be the design by Arçelik side, and they will be using it in compliance with the models. Everything that we are talking in here, there will be Arçelik Hitachi, the new name. So it all will be introduced in terms of selection of the suppliers, with relations with regards to third-party rules for economic sanctions, again, automatic systems, their introduction and so on. Both as Arçelik and of course for the compliance function of Koç Holding, because there are also rules imposed by them. imposed by them. So it's like all the rules are deployed all around the world. Of course, in doing business, there is at one side that we consider the culture of the Koç Holding Group, the Turkish culture on the top of this, and at the same time we deploy it to all other our companies all around the world, because we have over 40,000 employees. So we also adopt them to their culture. So we will have so much fun, I would say. So what Eray said is important. In the medium and the long run, this actually turns back to you. It has a return in your acquisition of Hitachi and so on. I'm sure it all facilitated what you're doing. And you actually can possibly establish your own systems, or maybe establish better systems, but once you cooperate, it's much better. This is all about being ethical. And thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Merve. What are you doing? How do you manage the risk? Thank you. Fikret, actually you gave so many headlines, but you also mentioned from our suppliers or our dealers and from the third parties we expect for the minimum. You're right. Maybe on the top of this I can say, so as to have sustainable chemistry, or better to say, if you would like to produce chemicals for a sustainable future, we also believe that our third parties at the same time should follow by the rules of compliance. What we're doing and how we manage these risks and so on. First of all, we are a global company. Our headquarters is in Germany. We at the same time have a mother company that directs us. They have so many leading policies and procedures, and at the local level we develop these, and at the same time, depending on our own local practices, we can have our own policies and procedures as well. And for these written procedures, and from the recruitment and selection of the third parties to their management, all these rules are used. Therefore, all our processes and rules are defined and in writing. And then about who these, we have a system that we can identify each and every third party. For all our third parties are either registered and or defined in the systems. Therefore, maybe the first step to have a risk for the third party is your ability to follow your third parties, of course. Similarly, as Gülay stated, we have a due diligence process with the third parties before we start, before signing of the contract. We make a due diligence. We have a set of questions, and that set of questions should be filled in fully, and then we assess the answers and do a risk analysis. If the risk is high, we consider how we can actually manage those risks or solve these risks. If the risk is low or none at all, then we conclude the contract. Of course, once we set due diligence, it's not an easy task, as you would appreciate. From time to time, we can actually hear some complaints why the process is so challenging, and almost we actually provide products, supply products to our dealers at different levels. Anywhere in country, we can work with different dealers. For example, some of them, for example, due diligence can be a brand new, something quite new for them. But for some of them, due diligence is actually a process that already in place in their companies. Some of the third parties are newly introduced to due diligence. Sometimes we have to make some long talks and long communication with them to tell them what due diligence is all about, but that's actually something intrinsic about this process. Following due diligence, then comes the contract making stage. Of course, it is very critical, the contract making, especially once we conclude a contract with the third parties. We mentioned that there will be compliance with the rules of ethicals. At the same time, the rules and procedures will be applied. And after conclusion of the contract, of course, you set up the risk, but at the same time, we have so many audit provisions as well, so as to follow up compliance in the long run. Of course, some of the articles are not accepted, therefore, depending on the risk analysis, you may have to change it. But what is important in here is that it's important to create a corporate culture that understands why there is the need for these types of provisions in the contract. And by the way, Mr. Sebilcioğlu, my connection will go off. Okay, yes. I think there's a technical problem, and while Merve is trying to reconnect, I would like to give the floor to Eray. Eray, at Borusan, I mean, after this introduction, okay, we have the risks. What you're doing so as to minimize the risk in terms of ethical compliance, I know you're doing a lot in terms of the universal rules of compliance, but what you're doing, I mean, what are the control mechanisms that you establish so as to manage the risks? And on the top of this, I also would like you to mention your expectations from your business partners. Thank you very much. Of course, I would be more than happy to answer the question, but if you allow me, both with regards to Merve and Gülay, I would like to make a couple of additional comments, because it's great that we are on the same stand. You mentioned about sustainability indices, how important they are. Of course, these are all the corporates that have that worthy value for the society, but we also have to consider profitability. So, especially for SMEs or for our potential third parties, it would be something nice to have an income gain as well. You know, our sustainability reports are being published over the long years, and we make a new announcement, and there is again for sustainability financing, again there is actually a new agreement that we made. Therefore, if anything that you're doing for the environment, for the risk taking, it also helps you for your finance as well. You can have, for example, easy access to finance, which is important as actually an incentive. So I wanted to mention that. The other topic is, as Merve said, and questions are coming. I think if time allows, we'll answer the question as well. But for due diligence contract samples and so on, you mentioned why it is important that we conclude contracts with our suppliers. Similarly, as you mentioned, what companies should do, how we can actually direct our suppliers. Just to provide you as an example of what we are doing, I would give you an example. The first thing is that if you have a multi-model, multi-tool management system, it is not like I did this and the compliance issue is over in the company. This is not the case. You mentioned about the digital media, and we have hundreds of digital robots. They're doing the job. We have. It is a must to have more than one model. Different tools, different models are used in terms of due diligence. Maybe very briefly, I can go through them. First thing is that we have internal regulations, culture and internal regulations. As I told you, you first meet Borusan. There is the identity of Borusan. What are the components of being the culture of Borusan? Like publishing it in the bulletins, providing training and so on is a part of it. But from time to time you have to update it, and you have to support it with some internal communication. Similarly, as a part of the governance, we have so many internal procedures. or processes. For example, if there is the need to do something on any issue, we have an internal procedure, but this is never in vain. As I told you, we're just updating and revising all the time. Thousands of things with the support of an external consultant, in which areas we have a procedure, what we should do. You mentioned about international sanctions. We know there's the need for procedures. If there is, for example, any misconduct and so on, and if you have a procedure and if you take a step, then you do not get it, for example, you are not penalized, and because you have a system in place. 20 years ago, and we are speaking about a company of 77 years, and not possible for a procedure of 2 decades ago that I can use now. It has to be updated and revised. We have so many checklists, so I can say we have a series of internal regulations. They are used by all business units, and for audit purposes, it is subject to additional control. We also have sustainability guidelines for us, for our business partners. It shows our expectations, like the Green Deal, as we mentioned. And we, for example, do international logistics and so on. And we provide, for example, supply products for Arçelik and so on. There is a global supply chain in here. If there is any carbon load, or your supplier, for example, should not have any child worker and so on. And as long as we have them in our standards, we will not create any risk for us and our business partners. And audit and compliance audit is so important. And there is something so important for us as a holding. Internal audit, internal control, and compliance management. These are actually the gears of an entire system. There are differences in between these terms, but also similarities. For example, risk assessment, control, and the risk management, for example, framework of Borusan and so on. We have it. Eray, if you sum up, because we don't have time, so I would like to move on to the questions if possible. Okay, then, so we have several awareness training, and if there is, for example, any warning or any complaint by the 4 main companies, there are mechanisms managing it. And for compliance management within the group, we make risk analysis about what is the risk, where the risk is, whether it will actually realize or not, what are the steps that should be taken so as to minimize the risk or eliminate the risk. So we have a compliance risk base. Then if we do not have time, what I would like to say is that sustainability is so important. In 2032, there's a carbon neutralization targets that we announce, how the emissions could be the case and so on. The Green Deal is something that we've been following from the very beginning. The Green Deal, how we are just going to be in compliance with them. Just like what we're doing, we also expect the others to do something about the Green Deal. And also about the carbon tax border, we are the very first private sector company, and therefore official opinion also given to the European Union. I believe that together with our public administrations, we will be discussing this carbon tax. So it's a part of it. These are the things that briefly, in a nutshell, what I can say. So Merve is here or not? If not, so I'll have to continue. Just a couple of questions, and so at least we'll get a couple of questions. You're saying that human is so important and so on. Especially you have some criteria that you expect the third parties to meet. How about the people of the third parties? How you can touch them and raise their standards to your level? I mean, so as to raise their ethical standard level, what are you doing? Anything you can mention about this?
Yani aslında
in practical terms, as you all know, I mentioned about the right to notification and so on. For a third party, like I impose my rules and saying that this is something in the contract written, you have to do it. If it is something not living and on paper, that's not the case. You need an audit mechanism so as to follow what they're doing. This is number one. I mean, you have to have a control over the third party. You should have some outcomes out of it and follow them. The second thing is more important about the channels of notification. I mean, you have to communicate it from different channels. Like, for example, you have to create an environment that people rely on and provide a feedback, and this channel must be open to the rest of the world, in my opinion. And it's not like accepting the internal notifications only. It will be something done just on paper. There must be different channels that the third parties, that the people are notifying you. For example, an employee of a third party. That third party should know these are the rules of Arçelik. You should provide them with the proper training, and in case of any misconduct, there must be a channel that they notify this misconduct to us. What I mean is that there are thousands of third parties and not possible actually to know about each misconduct. So I believe with the third party compliance programs, you're trying to transform their culture, and therefore you actually have to take some clear steps on this. Thank you. And thank you very much for mentioning about this. For example, it is thanks to the denouncing that it's possible to mention about any misconduct, I mean, to notify it to them. There's a good control mechanism, but also, I mean, not only reporting the misconduct or this, but everyone working as a compliance officer in the companies, I'm saying, those who are raising the complaint, how you are going to protect them, because people are afraid of this. And yes, even retaliation is a major issue in companies investing on a lot. The other thing is that if third-party risks are so important, does that vary from one country to the other? I mean, while working with the United States, let's assume you work with someone from Uzbekistan the other day. Are the standards changing from one country to the other? Our standards is the same, but the risk would differ. I mean, as we expect the minimum, we would expect the same thing, but the risk would vary. I mean, for specific countries, some of the risks can be more important than the other countries. So maybe you need a thorough analysis of that specificity. Eray, anything you want to mention?
Çok ufak bir ekleme yapabilirim. Aslında gerçekten norm bazında baktığınızda
on ethical and cultural norms, there are universal norms, but in practice what matters is the regulations. Of course, there are also some case laws of the Court of Cassation and so on. There could be some specific jurisprudence of certain countries, but in our own standards we are never flexible. But this is the culture and the regulations specific of that country, so you have to do business accordingly. That's how the other companies are working. I have to ask this question. Lawyer and John, and briefly saying, actually, ethical compliance is like a brake mechanism, and this is a part of a balancing mechanism. And what are the things that you experience in general, and how you overcome this? Let's not call it a brake system, but let's say control. Control speed, let's say, or speed under control. Do not use terms like brake system. But again, it's a very critical part of this balance and audit.
business nerede?
The business would show reaction at which point if you're asking me.
Ya benim
And not only based on my Arçelik experience, I also worked at the international level in so many multinational companies and so on. If you're asking me, business, if understands well why you are doing what, they will never react. It's all about how you acknowledge them. It's not like a 15 minutes of, for example, a talk on a year. If you go to a business, you go to the business leader and saying that this is the risk of economic sanction, that is how the end would be. For GDPI, that is such a risk, that this is a risk for your business. Once you mention it, they will never react to anything. They will never put the brake pedal. So it's also very important to make it from top to bottom, I guess. The message should be from top to bottom. It must be a sound thing, and everywhere should be deployed everywhere in the atmosphere. So you have to start from the seniors. Too many questions that we have, but one wise question and a challenging question. Maybe as a question, the third party, you set all the rules, and if there's a problem that you're not going to work with them, but that is the only single supplier and you have to work with them, what would you do if they are not compliant and they are the only single supplier? Who would like the answer? I'm back again, by the way.
Hiç önemli değil, hiç önemli değil.
Actually, this is the tough, the most difficult question, and it comes to you. Sorry for this connection. It's a part of the era. A great question, by the way, and something that we also experience all the time. Of course, not possible. I'm sure that that's the problem that we all have as different corporations. I actually wanted to touch it, so nice to bring it up. The less number of third parties that you have, the less risk that you will have. It's actually quite clear. But on the other hand, having less suppliers is also something you should keep in balance, because if they are not compliant to your ethical values, not possible for you to work with that third party. What could be the alternative to this? I think there must be some alternative suppliers this way or that way. This is actually a business decision that you should take. The other thing is that maybe it's a huge responsibility on your shoulder if you really would like to work with that third party. And you can educate them. There is a compliance dialogue that we have. So, especially be in contact with their compliance officers and so on. Yes, there will be so many liabilities and responsibility for this, but if you really have to work with that specific third party, then you have to raise that to the same level with you. It must be the task of the company to do so. And I actually have to close the session. So thank you very much to you, to all of you, and thank you very much for not leaving us alone and for supporting the Ethics and Reputation Society. Why? Because as we are doing advocacy, it's very important for us that you share your experience. And last 1 minute for myself, as a concluding words. We can actually purchase a watch with money but not time. We can at the same time purchase a bed with money but not sleep. We can buy actually food but not appetite. And you can get thousands or hundreds of houses with your money but not a home. Same for integrity. Integrity is not something that you can buy with money. Just like in the Tin novel by Yaşar Kemal, 100,000 again years of gravel washed under water takes so much time. It's the main theme. Do the right deed and be integral all together and work in an environment of confidence. Eray also stated, I enjoyed the line of Pink Floyd which I listened to, and that line by Pink Floyd is something that I enjoyed the most. And thank you very much, Aslı, for that introduction with the lyrics. So I will end up It is always the words of the poems that remains in the world, not those in power. Even the sweetest thing will go sour. And sometimes the lilies that are rotten will actually smell worse than anything. So just try to keep away from the rotten.